Hi team, Ms. Wong here to talk to you about chapter 28. Okay, so the end of the book, actually, yeah, we're gonna skip to chapter 28. So the last chapter of Beloved is not like the last chapter in terms of ending the story. I would say that the end of the story happens in chapter 27. Um, the last two pages, which is chapter 28, I want you to think of it as almost like reading a poem, and the final ideas that Toni Morrison wants to leave her reader with. So to just provide a little bit of context, we know that Denver is now living her independent best life. Beloved was exorcised out of the house. Paul D comes back to try to remedy his relationship with Setha. Setha feels really sad that her kids have left her, and Paul D is trying to get Setha to realize that yes, her children can be precious to her, but her best thing in the end is going to be herself. So cycles are being broken, like we've talked about for the last couple of chapters. And then some people have said that the ending with Setha and Paul D doesn't seem that happy, but I think that we would be foolish to think that Toni Morrison was just going to do a complete 180 on us, and change the book into like a romantic love story after everything that has happened so far. So chapter 28, read it like a poem. Also, like to plant the seed of reading it like a poem, we want to be thinking literally, but we also want to be thinking figuratively. So literally, the book is about a woman who's trying to come to terms with killing her own child. Figuratively, there's so many other things that the book could be talking about. It's about confronting our nation's past, the whole idea about coming to terms with our own personal history and how we deal with that. It can be how we deal with family and intergenerational trauma. It could be just about grief. So many things that it's figuratively about. Okay, so the other thing that I want to plant in your head before we begin reading is that Toni Morrison's going to ambivalently use the pronoun she. And okay, so like initially we know that this book is about so many women, Denver, Beloved, and Setha especially. And so the she can be any one of them. But I also want you to think about how she uses she to personify different ideas. Okay, so let's read and then we'll do an example of it. Okay, so the very first chapter, or sorry, very first line, it's going to be on page 323. There's a loneliness that can be rocked, arms crossed, knees drawn up, holding on, this motion unlike a ship's, smooths and contains the rocker. It's an inside kind, wrapped tight like skin. Then there is a loneliness that roams. No rocking can hold it down. It is alive on its own, a dry and spreading thing that makes the sound of one's own feet going seem to come from a far off place. Okay, so literally there's these two kinds of loneliness, the kind that has to be comforted and felt, and then the kind that also has to kind of roam and experience. So literally that's what's talking about. Figuratively, Beloved could have been representative of this loneliness, especially with this whole idea of like roaming, because we know that she roamed from death to life and then from person to person, and that she ignited all of these feelings within the characters that made them turn inward and deal with all of their past traumas and insecurities. And they had to do that before they could do anything to really help anyone else in the book. Okay, next one. Everybody knew what she was called, but nobody anywhere knew her name. Disremembered and unaccounted for, she cannot be lost because no one is looking for her. And even if they were, how can they call her if they don't know her name? Although she has claim, she is not claimed. In the place where long grass opens, the girl who waited to be loved and cry, shame erupts into her separate parts to make it easy for the chewing laughter to swallow her all away. Okay, so this is how like the stories of the women in the book, they get so easily forgotten, especially when they're just held within the memories of individuals. And then also we know the background story of Beloved is based on the story of a woman named Margaret Garner. So unless like Toni Morrison had to have come across that newspaper clipping of Margaret Garner while she was making the Black Book in order for Beloved to actually become what it is. So Margaret Garner is an example of like everybody knew what she was called, but nobody anywhere knew her name, disremembered and unaccounted for. Margaret Garner's story has to be the story of so many other people who have come before who we just don't know about. Either because representatively, their stories are not passed on, or their stories have died within individuals who don't carry on or pass down the stories. So there's this line that's going to happen next that says it was not a story to pass on. I want you to be thinking about the multiple interpretations of this line and why it is repeated over and over again throughout these last 2 pages of the book. Okay, they forgot her like a bad dream. After they made up their tales, shaped and decorated them, those that saw her that day on the porch quickly and deliberately forgot her. It took longer for those who had spoken to her, lived with her, fallen in love with her, to forget, until they realized that they couldn't remember or repeat a single thing she said, and began to believe that, other than what they themselves were thinking, she hadn't said anything at all. So in the end, they forgot her too. Remembering seemed unwise. They never knew where or why she crouched or whose was in the underwater face she needed like that, where the memory of the smile under her chin might have been and was not, a latch latched and a lichen attached to his apple brown or apple green bloom to the metal. What made her think of fingernails could open her fingernails could open locks the rain rained on. Okay. This is where the she gets complicated. They forgot her like a bad dream after they made up their tales, shaped and decorated them. So the she in this instance might not just be beloved of being forgotten. The she in this instance could be history or like the stories that we tell, that when bad things happen to us, we often forget them like a bad dream. Or sometimes people will make up stories to help rationalize their behavior in these bad stories, or they might make up stories for things that they don't understand too. Like that happens often as well. So the she, again, to repeat myself, the she here is changing from being just about a person, or it's ambivalent and ambiguous, where it goes back and forth between being about a person, but also being about history. But in the end, it all gets forgotten. The truth of it gets forgotten if it doesn't get passed on accurately. All right, and then it gets repeated here. It was not a story to pass on. So they forgot her, like an unpleasant dream during a troubling sleep. Occasionally, however, the rustle of a skirt, hushes when they wake, and the knuckles brushing a creak in sleep seem to belong to the sleeper. Sometimes the photograph of a close friend or relative looked at 2 long shifts, and something more familiar than the dear face itself moves there. They can touch it if they like, but they don't, because they know things will never be the same if they do. Okay, so this is like literally the process of remembering, or like what happens. So they forgot her like an unpleasant dream during a troubling sleep. Occasionally, however, like little reminders will happen throughout people's lives to remind them of these things that have happened. And when that happens to us, we have the decision that we have to make. Are we going to process this memory? Are we going to confront it? Are we going to go through it again? Or are we going to ignore it? And then the last line touches on that. They can touch it if they like, but don't, because they know things will never be the same if they do. Especially like if we know that we have to grapple with something, if we know it's going to change our current viewpoint or how we think about things, it's gonna maybe make us pause or prevent us from being able to do it. Like we talked about that in class a little bit about how knowing the truth about history or being able to talk about things that maybe our parents or other generations don't talk about is it's scary for them to know about or to process for themselves, because it would then have to alter the way that they have previously seen the world, and that's difficult. And Toni Morrison addresses it here, and she wrote this in 1987. Okay, so then she repeats at the end, this is not a story to pass on. Last paragraph, or last 2 paragraphs. Down by the stream and back of 124, her footprints come and go, come and go. They are so familiar. Should a child and adult place his feet in them, they will fit. Take them out and they disappear again as though nobody ever walked there. By and by, all trace is gone, and what is forgotten is not only the footprints, but the water too, and what is down there. The rest is weather. Not the breath of the disremembered and unaccounted for, but wind in the eaves, or spring ice flying too quickly. Just weather. Certainly no clamor for a kiss. Beloved. Okay, so like if we go too long without remembering these things, then they really do get completely forgotten. And that's what she touches on here. So this line that gets repeated 3 times throughout these 2 pages, it was not a story to pass on. It was not a story to pass on. I want you to think about how that line is read. Okay, so is it like, this is not a story to pass on. I'm passing this story on to someone else. And like what aspects is being talked about there? The story to pass on, like we don't want to pass the trauma on, right? So that means that we have to go through that intense amount of reflection that we've talked about before. So this is not a story to pass on from one person to another, like you don't want them to go through it. But the other interpretation could also be that this is not a story to pass on, like pass, no thank you. That like we have to read difficult, hard things like this in order to understand history, but also understand our place within history as well. So 2 interpretations, not a story to pass on, like we don't want to repeat this. This is not a story to pass on. You don't want to skip over this, because if you skip over it, then you have a higher chance of repeating it. Okay, End of Beloved, super glad that you guys liked reading this book. So many of you, when we read those last pages, you just closed your book and you were like, that's a really good book, and you shook it. So I hope you hold on to these books forever. I bought them with my own money. And I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.